Welcome to the Changing Channels podcast, brought to you by the Mile High Flood District and the Learning Community Advisory Council.
Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation today on the Changing Channels podcast. I'm here with Moneka Worah from ERO Resources Corporation. I'm Mary Powell, the Deputy Director of Stream Management Services at the Mile High Flood District. And today, Moneka and I are going to do a little reminiscing. Moneka and I have been colleagues for a couple of decades now, I think.
Over 20 years.
Yeah. Yikes. Okay. Moneka and I are going to be just doing some chatting back about how the Section 404 regulatory process has evolved over time and how that's affected the projects at the district, and just sort of some implications of having regulations involved with our projects over the years.
Well, thank you, Mary, for having me here.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Yeah, it's actually very much my pleasure. Why don't we start just a little bit with, setting the stage for how Section 404 has shaped our projects. Maybe when we started our careers, what did Section 404 feel like for you at the time?
When I was first starting with you, it was a lot more just being handed a plan set from an engineer and being told, go get a permit for this. And the permitting itself process, although still probably felt a lot more regulated, wasn't as difficult. You could definitely get nationwide permits very quickly, very easy. What was his name? Tim
Carey?
No, not Tim Carey.
Terry McKee?
Terry McKee, that's who I was thinking about.
Yeah.
He was a great guy at the Corps who, was easy to issue a nationwide permit.
He in fact, was known for what they called Terry-wides instead of nationwides, because he would somehow find his way to apply some sort of nationwide permit to most anything you could come up with.
Yes, exactly. So it was a lot easier to get those nationwide permits. Individual permits felt a lot easier. And so if you got handed a plan set with some section of piping or some huge culvert or drop structure, it wasn't that difficult to get the permit itself.
Yeah.
How did it feel for when you started?
Well, I'd say the same, maybe even a little looser, because I think I came on the scene about 10 years before you did, in the mid-90s or so. That was back in the day where you could impact up to 5 acres under a nationwide permit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? Oh, wow. So the times they have changed for sure. And of course, back in the day, the permits were simpler, but I will say too that the projects were simpler, right? And I'd kind of like to, as we move through our conversation, maybe talk about ways that the permit process and the regulatory scene has kind of influenced the complexity of our projects, because I think that has been the case. But yeah, absolutely, I'm with you. I remember back in the day, getting a permit was not a big deal at all. The plans we would submit things that were almost on the back of a napkin. Not quite there, but pretty simple.
And how have stream restoration projects, you think, evolved since then?
Well, they've certainly gone from just riprap and a bunch of willow stakes, if you're lucky, to obviously much more complex projects that are taking into account all the geomorphological processes, the more intricate vegetation, revegetation efforts associated with that for sure.
Community values.
Yeah, we've been incorporating more concerns about the various aspects of the context that our projects are found in. We've certainly gone from those concrete line channels to something more complex. And I think a great example, and this is something Dave Skoudas and I have touched on in the past, is Little Dry Creek up in Westminster. Provides an excellent story about the evolution of Section 404 permitting over time. If you go to the upstream end of Little Dry Creek, it's concrete lined. It looks like the LA River in the Terminator. Terminator 2, where they're
It's just pure concrete.
it's just pure concrete. It was all about moving water from point A to point B. And that was done, that could have been done very soon, frankly. I think it was maybe it was in the 70s. No. The Clean Water Act has only been around since 1972, I think, right around there. So the district actually predates the issuance of the Clean Water Act.
That's crazy.
I know, right? So when the district got started, people were just like, let's blow and go and get her done.
And it was more on flood conveyance, right?
It was
that's why the district was created.
Correct. Absolutely focused on getting that water out of there, away from the homes. Unfortunately, in a lot of our older areas, those homes had been built prior to floodplain regulations. The National Insurance Policy program, I think, started also in the early 70s. So before then, and FEMA and floodplain mapping, before that, people were just like, nah, let's go ahead and we'll just fill in the floodplain and put our home right against the creek. So,
well, and you can see that evolution definitely just in the Front Range area of like Jefferson County. A lot of the houses are right next to the creeks, right? And so any kind of improvements really have to just go within those boundaries of what is there right now versus in Douglas County, where there's a lot more development happening now, how much room both the county, municipalities, and the district are trying to advocate for the stream itself. And so,
absolutely,
those houses are important to have next to the stream, but maybe give them 50 or 100 or even 300 feet.
That's right. Right. Well, and there's another perfect example. I'll finish this little Dry Creek example, but then help me circle back to what you're saying about the floodplains. With the little Dry Creek example, once the Clean Water Act was in place, the Corps started, some of their regulations include trying to minimize your adverse impacts. And so they started looking at projects a little more critically. And I can tell you that the concrete line LA River style thing wasn't something that they were wanting to see permitted. And so there was a lot of pushback on some designs. And again, if you continue downstream from those concrete line pieces of Little Dry Creek, you'll start to find some boulder edging. It still had a concrete pan in the bottom of the creek, but the boulder edging was kind of an acknowledgement of, okay, let's not be quite so hardened. There was some overbank areas, and as the stream moves downstream, there is more space because it starts going through some parklands. But even farther downstream, okay, we're not going to line the bottom of the channel anymore. It's just boulders. And then finally down at like Westminster Station, it's a full-on natural stream design, very much, you couldn't even tell it was a constructed channel. And some of that, it really was from the pushback from the Corps saying, you cannot concrete line a channel. We're just not going to permit that. And so I think it got people thinking. But to your point about floodplains, maybe you can talk about that. That's another regulatory pushback, right? Where, except it wasn't on the flood control projects, it was more on housing development, right? And development.
Yeah, and that at one point, the Corps did start saying, well, we are going to permit the residential developments if the primary purpose, is to fill the floodplain for this development, then you will likely not get a permit for it. And
that's right.
It has been a evolution and a good push in my mind to protect that floodplain because it can just be an upland area, but it provides such an important resource when the flooding actually happens to have room for that amount of water to go through the area and not be concerned that a house might impact it and, get washed away.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it did start again with the Corps kind of pushing back on what they will allow for developments and for permits themselves.
And the local governments, I think it's an important aspect was that they also started to buy into the floodplain development regulatory process. That the district also, I think, was a leading edge of that as well. Being a regional flood management organization was unique, I think, when we started.
Well, and even just what you guys have been doing up to today, right? The Stream Management Academy is a great example of just trying to educate not only the community that are working on those projects, but the planners that may be overseeing developments or overseeing stream improvements, and why it is important to kind of protect those corridors. And even from the main creek corridors to those little ephemeral drainages that are more likely to get graded over because there is no floodplain, maybe.
Right, right. Yeah.
They still play a critical role.
They do.
The system.
Yeah, they're absolutely an important part of the network. And to some degree, again, the Clean Water Act permitting started acknowledging that by, again, not wanting to lose the loss of that stream length through piping and whatnot. So I will say the district from early on was very much a proponent of keeping open channels. So sometimes these things work nicely hand in hand, and they can kind of lead to better things. It's regulatory, but then I think it can really actually lead to some better solutions for sure. Going back to the floodplain issue, I know we've, for quite a bit here at the district and the planning departments you're talking about, it's really been an education process as well with the development community. I think now the development community has recognized what an amenity these nice broad floodplains can be to their developments. That
they can add more value to a house if you have them in this beautiful corridor versus if you just try to narrow it down. It's not providing as much of that natural value.
Yep, they're able to get those lot premiums that kind of offset that lost quote unquote development space. So I think that's been a pretty good thing. I kind of want to transition us from just kind of that regulatory piece of just getting the permit and how that's influenced projects. I think we touched on that pretty well, but one of the things I think we're seeing that I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit now is the kind of mitigation, the compensatory mitigation.
Okay.
And if it's okay, I'll start because I have the older history. But
still a youngin'
at heart. That's right. Thank you so much. I was joking earlier and thank you. I want to acknowledge the folks helping us here today. We have some folks from Naranjo and Western States. Really appreciate you guys helping us with recording all this. Absolutely couldn't happen without you guys. But I was suggesting they might be able to use a soft filter to make me look a little younger. And they said, sorry, we don't have anything that could do that.
A little touch up.
Back end editing. Anyway, for the mitigation, when I started mitigation at the time, there were no mitigation banks. There were no compensatory mitigation banks where you could buy a credit. For those of you who may not be aware, when you have impacts to stream systems or wetlands, part of the 404 permit process is to compensate for wetlands that you've impacted that are going to be permanently affected. And so back in the day, that typically consisted of just creating a wetland bench alongside the stream channel, or you might dish out someplace, even off-site, to create some wetlands using groundwater or some other opportunity. But it was very much, you did it with the project, you did it mostly on-site, and that was it. You didn't have to do anything special. You did do some monitoring to make sure that it established as a wetland.
And it could be full of cattails?
Could have been full of cattails. It didn't matter. As a wetland was a wetland. The quality of the wetland didn't matter. We could be going in and impacting a high quality herbaceous, sedge, rush, wetland, and put it back cattails. And that was fine because that's all that mattered. But over time, we started talking more, and maybe you could address this a little bit. We started talking more about, instead of just acre by acre, the functional loss that's associated with the various wetlands.
No, definitely. There's, in just in the 20 years as well, I've seen the evolution of no functional assessments needed to now requiring it. Wetlands, it still somewhat varies on how often you have to do those functional assessments, but now for streams, anytime you need stream mitigation, you're needing to do those functional assessments. And I think there's still work to be done on how to improve that assessment method, but it's still maybe movement in the right direction, because before, I do remember that if you impacted linear feet of stream, you just had to put that same linear feet back. It didn't matter the functionality of it or if it made sense to have that same length of stream. That's just what you were required to do. So we would tell engineers, just put in a little side channel, you know, and that's how you made up for that requirement. And that doesn't make sense, right? It makes sense to look at the function and what actually is right for the system and what are the bed form diversity or that lateral stability that's really needed that makes a stream function well, and the right width for the stream, right? The South Platte River is really wide, but it's over wide now because it's so regulated, and there's not enough flows to really probably make sense for how wide and shallow it gets in certain areas, and maybe it needs to be a little bit more narrow and deeper to have the true fish habitat and aquatic habitat it should have in the river.
Yeah.
But that's where sometimes that functional assessments now kind of can help to provide that assessment and understanding of where to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, mitigation has definitely evolved over the years, and for good or bad. Do you want to get into the hierarchy? Because I feel like we could debate the hierarchy.
We could. Maybe before we go on, we'll leave the hierarchy a little bit as a mystery for a moment, because I wanted to just ask you, you know, you were talking about the stream assessments, and here in Colorado, we the Corps of Engineers applies what the Colorado Stream Quantification Tool, or CSQT, is the assessment method that the Corps uses to determine credits and debits. You know, if you have a permit or a project that impacts a stream channel, you may end up having a debit that you have to make up by either restoring the creek to a certain level or purchasing those, offsetting those debits by buying credits from a mitigation bank, they're very expensive. And maybe you could address just a little bit, given the cost of those credits, what are your thoughts on kind of designing to the tool, designing to the functional assessment? Do you think, what are your thoughts on that? Does it happen?
Oh, it happens all the time. And I think we have to, unfortunately. One of your sayings that I've always remembered is never design for the permit, design for what you are needing. But the reality is the stream quantification tool has pushed us to have to kind of go away from that and design to this. It's not a functional assessment. It is a debiting credit tool, is what the Corps says, but it pushes you often into a debit. And because those credits are so expensive right now, it's really impossible sometimes for projects to be able to afford those credits. And then it makes more sense to design to what the tool says would create that functional lift. And that's the problem that I see with that functional assessment, is that it's not. It had a limited amount of reference sites that it was based on, and they were all based on more single thread, more mountainous type stream systems, and they didn't take into account the urban systems or braided systems or ephemeral systems, but were all scored to this one type of stream system.
Yeah.
And it has caused a lot of, I think, increased costs for projects. You know, the SQT analysis is pretty expensive to do, and again, doesn't maybe result in the ultimate project that you're really wanting. So I think there are more efforts that could be done to improve that tool. I'm also interested to see if the state is able to kind of try and push for a new tool for ephemeral streams, that now that the state is going to be regulating ephemeral streams and maybe even intermittent streams, depending on federal regulations, they have an opportunity to create a different type of assessment method that could really fit both needs of understanding what are those functions from an ephemeral and intermittent standpoint, while not being a costly burden or a tool that you're just trying to fit for every single project.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fine line. I think we all would agree that we don't want to compromise on lost functionality of our stream systems, because they do provide important, flood regulation, sediment capture, wildlife habitat, lots of good stuff. And we certainly don't want to go back to the bad old days of replacing a beautiful wet meadow with stand of cattails. Nobody wants that. And to your point, though, we also don't want to take it so far to the other side where we're applying these methods that really aren't, frankly, meaningful. Maybe you could give an example. You talked about kind of gaming I want to make clear that
you're not gaming the system.
Not gaming the system. We're working within the regulations as they're presented. And this is, the reality is that the regulated public has to navigate between these various pressures. There's what do we need to do to accomplish our project purpose and need? What do we need to do to get the authorizations, the permits for these and the clearances? And so how does that influence our design? Do you mind giving an example, for instance, the way that CSQT sometimes in a sandy system might drive a design a certain way as opposed to necessarily what might be a typical approach, but to kind of get those scores, some things that you might do in a such situation like that maybe isn't the best.
And I won't get into the details, but in the SQT functional assessment, there are various variables. There are several variables that you can score. And for ephemeral systems, they often say, okay, you don't need to measure X, Y, and Z. So then it puts a lot more weight on the 5 maybe variables that you are measuring. And so with those, then you have to really look at, okay, lateral stability. What are ways that we can show that right now the banks are really, low quality or eroded, and we're going to improve the system. For riparian, that's often one that's an easy one to try and show a higher lift, because you could say, okay, the vegetation right now is at a 30% cover, and we're going to promise to get it to like 80% cover. And with the reality is an ephemeral system, oftentimes it's upland vegetation that's probably pretty bare because it's a sandy type system already. And so you may be promising trees and shrubs in an area that may not even have the water to support those trees and shrubs, but you need to show that lift. So there's certain ways that you are trying to manipulate the tool a little bit to get that lift. And I think overall monitoring on these systems have shown that we've been successful, and it's not like we're showing something that we can't actually achieve, but it is, again, does it make sense to put trees and shrubs in a system that doesn't have them already? I don't know if it does. I mean, maybe in 5 years when there's more water in that system after development comes in is the right time to put those trees and shrubs in.
Yeah, do some phased planting.
Yeah.
Well, and I was even thinking of systems like Upper Cherry Creek and so forth, where it's a sand bed system, but if you put in a riffle pool complex, suddenly it scores better. And I think most of us would agree a riffle pool complex isn't exactly something you would expect to see in a sandy,
ephemeral
plains ecosystem, or even an intermittent, system like Cherry Creek. For parts of it, it's not a riffle pool complex; it's a braided system. So
no, or maybe you increase the length of the stream a little bit, widen out that bend, because that'll automatically give you some increased lift when you increase the stream length.
That's right.
So it's kind of almost going back to what it was before. That wasn't the intention.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be.
How have you seen evolution on wetlands or, say, willows? And approaches to mitigation on that standpoint?
Yeah, well, I think way back in the day, I think I alluded to this earlier, when it was cattails and sandbar willow, the wetlands that we would put back, along some of our projects were admittedly rudimentary. If we put willow stakes in the buried soil riprap, that was our wetland mitigation. And I think we probably overdid it. I think there are a lot of our stream systems right now that suffer from being overgrown with willows, because at the time, literally, we would plant 3 rows of willows on each side of the stream bank at 3 feet on center. And the only reason we did 3 rows at 3 feet on center is it was easy to quantify because that equals 1 willow stake per linear foot. So, things like that. And now we are so much more sophisticated in how we approach the wetland mitigation and the design and what we're putting in. We're really thoughtful about the plantings, the hydrology. We try to do so much thinking ahead of time about where the water table is going to be, what's going to be wetted, what are the appropriate species in each hydrologic zone, trying to get the plantings clumped in sort of more natural patches to emulate more of a natural system. So things have changed dramatically. Doing soil tests, we test for soils so much more than we used to. Getting ecotypes, trying to find plantings and trees that have been grown here in our geographic area so that they're more adapted to our climate instead of getting things trucked in from, the Midwest. All kinds of things like that. I do think one thing we could do better, it's a little hard, but I think we could do better with salvaging some of the materials that we encounter on our sites. It does take a little more effort to identify those, take them out, hold them, and keep them alive, thinking trees and shrubs mostly.
Although I feel like you had a couple projects where it was salvaging like Nebraska sedge as a sod, but from the site itself.
Yeah. There are a few. I mean, when it happens sporadically, I think we could try to be more deliberate about it. I will say, though, frankly, a lot of our projects that the district works on, we're kind of going into some pretty degraded areas.
Yeah.
And if we have Nebraska sedge, it's like, whoa, that's pretty nice. Usually it's reed canary grass, right?
Yeah.
That we're fighting against.
Yeah.
But the whole wetland science of doing mitigation has absolutely become much more embraced with our industry.
And I think the district has been great about leading that effort and having, again, the ecologists and landscape architects part of the project from the very beginning. So we can say, well, if we're gonna try and do mitigation on site, this is how much you need to create, and here's how, best locations for those wetland establishments or best species to be incorporated into the design.
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to do that and work collaboratively, again, with the engineers rather than being handed that plan set and then saying, okay, well, where are the wetlands?
Yeah, get a permit. Well, just real quickly, I'll digress a little bit. Well, first, I totally agree that bringing in the extra disciplines with the landscape architects and the ecologists working together along with the engineering design team and the geomorphologist has been a real improvement in how we approach our projects. I wanted to share just one little anecdote about, this is way back in the day, being handed a plan set and being asked to go get a permit. I was handed a plan set for the access road along US 36 right near Big Dry Creek. They were going to build a bridge across the creek kind of right near the butterfly pavilion. And at the time there was an oxbow in the creek right where they wanted to put the bridge in. So, well, maybe let's just straighten the creek. We'll just take the oxbow out. We'll blow through the oxbow, straighten the creek, and then we can have our it's just be so much easier hydraulically to site the bridge and build it and all that.
Straighten that creek.
Straighten the creek. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's, it's bendy. It doesn't work with our ruler, the line that we're trying to draw. So took it to the Corps, and before I took it to the Corps, I did say, just so you know, it's we'll see what they say. And sure enough, Rex Fletcher with the Corps was like, yeah, I'm not going to permit that. And, I tried to work with, well, what if, nope, yep, sorry, that is not going to work. We're not going to let you reline that creek. So I had to go back to the design team and give them the bad news that, sorry, but you have to redesign this whole thing.
It's not going to work.
It's not going to work. So they went back to the drawing board, literally, and redesigned it to protect that bend and put the bridge across. And of course, it cost them time and money. I will say, I can't remember who the engineer was at the time, but I'll guarantee you they didn't wait next time to ask about the permit approach.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too, is getting the permitting and getting the ecologists, the landscape architect, geomorphologists, not just involved in the project at some point, but as early in the project as possible, I think has been a real improvement in how we accomplish things.
The same on the back end of like during construction and, even doing above and beyond what is monitoring, I think is a great way. The district is also trying to push, more of that ecology focus for projects. Because before, again, I don't think it was that we were asked to go out to the site during construction and see how those wetlands are developing. So you just go out during the first year of monitoring and be like, yeah, this isn't looking so good. Like, this looks like it was graded too high.
Right.
And then having to tell them, hey, you're going to have to think about coming back out here to fix it and get the wetlands that you need, or go to a bank if you have to do that. So really having that involvement through construction, I think, is really key to making sure that the project is successful. And the establishment, again, going above and beyond what's required from the permit and really making sure that the site is progressing the way that you want it to.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and that's getting those things established as a successful result is certainly something that I think all the teams take some good pride in. We're at about half an hour here. Do you think it's time to circle back to the hierarchy? Or do you think we should talk about the future here and what might be happening?
Well, let's quickly talk about the hierarchy.
Okay.
And then talk about the future.
Okay. All right. Because the future kind of circles around somewhat. The hierarchy kind of affects it.
Yeah.
The hierarchy that we're talking about here, maybe you can give the audience just a little quick 1-minute thumbnail. What the heck we're talking about?
Yes.
Reveal the mystery, please,
So,
Moneka.
as Mary stated before, there was really no requirements on mitigation. And I think across the country, mitigation was being implemented very haphazardly and not successfully. And so the Corps saw that there was a need to really make sure that mitigation was being implemented at a higher level, a better level. And so they put together the 2008 mitigation rule. And so this rule, for good or bad, kind of outlines what is required for every mitigation project. And in that rule, it has a hierarchy of what the Corps should require for mitigation, saying that if a mitigation bank is available, then you should use that as it's the first choice, then an in lieu fee project, then mitigation on site using a watershed approach, then on-site mitigation without that watershed approach in kind, and then the last option being off-site or out-of-kind mitigation.
Yeah.
And in Colorado, I believe what it was is, even though that 2008 rule came into play, we really haven't seen the effects into the last few years of it because there just wasn't as often mitigation banks available. There maybe would be one bank here, but then they would sell out, or there just wasn't a market. I don't know if maybe a mitigation banking community could say why they didn't come in here until the last 5-10 years, but there wasn't that market. And so the Corps didn't have any options other than to allow on-site mitigation. And so for the longest time, we, even with district projects, we could say it's a drainage easement and we're going to do this. And they would say, okay, cool. And check the box.
Yeah.
But now we have more of a banking community, I guess, here is what you would call it. And so there are several mitigation banks online for both stream and wetlands. And so the Corps is now kind of enforcing that rule and saying if a bank is available, you should use it. So how is it influencing district projects right now?
Yeah, well, just a couple days ago, I was preparing for another presentation, and I got online with the mitigation banks in Colorado, and I pulled all the information about how many credits the district has purchased over the years.
Oh,
yeah,
you could find that.
Yes, they have great records. You can download a spreadsheet. So I downloaded spreadsheets from all the banks, and then I had my friend Chatty G create create a single spreadsheet that compiled all the MHFD purchases over time.
Wow.
And you could definitely see,
A huge spike.
a big uptick. The district in total has purchased about 12 acres of mitigation bank credits, which is approximately analogous to about 12 acres of wetland mitigation impacts. Although, I should say we probably didn't impact that high of an acreage, but with the mitigation ratios, which are typically higher than 1-to-1, we've purchased 12 credits.
Which actually, when you think about it, over however many years that went back, that's not a huge amount.
It's not a huge amount, but I will say, like I said, it's going up and up. So, we're fortunate. Remember, we're coming into a lot of degraded systems. So many of our purchases, our projects may only impact a third of an acre or a quarter of an acre.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of little things that add up. But anyway, so we've definitely purchased probably close to $2 million worth of mitigation credits, which from my perspective, and I think I speak for the district, as stewards of both our taxpayer money and of our environment, I would much rather see that money put back into our stream systems here in the district. And so to that end, one thing that I've been working on for a couple of years now is establishing our own, what's called a sole user umbrella mitigation bank, so that, hey, if the Corps says we have to go to a bank, I'm going to make sure it's our bank that we've created using projects that we're doing that are suitable for use as a mitigation bank site. So I'm establishing a wetland mitigation bank right now. We're hoping to get one of our first projects through the door just to kind of get the whole thing set up, and then we'll slowly over time identify new sites in consultation with the Corps and the EPA and start to accrue some credits. So instead of purchasing credits outside of the district boundaries and kind of exporting those important functions someplace else, the intent is to keep those functions, those important stream functions here in the district through use of the mitigation bank. So I'm pretty excited about that.
That's very exciting. I think that's a great improvement, because it is, I mean, I think most of the district projects are trying to restore these degraded systems, and it is important to have those functions stay where they are. They provide a lot of important functions for habitat, for flood protection, sediment removal or sediment storage. And I think putting them to an outside of the watershed or in the watershed but completely out of the district boundaries doesn't make sense. And obviously you have projects here and there that may need those credits, but have them in the district makes a lot more sense.
Yeah. Well, and I do want to make a point, because I think it's an important one to make, and I know I can say this, or you can nod your head or say so, but neither of us, I think, is saying that mitigation banking system in and of itself is not a good idea, because I do think there are many instances where there are projects that, it is not helpful to try for that particular project proponent to compensate for their own mitigation or their mitigation impacts, because they may not have a lot of good experience with creating and maintaining wetlands. So I am 100% pro mitigation bank when the circumstances are appropriate. I do think,
and I think I agree, and I think it's just more if we could get the regulators, the Corps, to see that, depending on the entity that's going after it, what in that hierarchy makes the most sense. Because there are a lot of developments. I've had a lot of developers who there was no mitigation bank available. And so they're like, okay, we'll create a wetland over here on the side. And, when we tell them, oh, it needs weed control or it needs to replant these trees and shrubs, they don't want to deal with that. They have no interest in creating wetlands or habitat. And so it in those instances, it definitely makes sense to go to a bank and to have that done by somebody who really knows what they're doing.
Yeah. I think if we had a little more flexibility and acknowledgement that not every project is the same, not every applicant is the same, not every wetland is the same. I think that'd be helpful, but we'll see where that goes, which kind of leads us to the future, see where things go. I'm curious if you have and we're wrapping up here. I'm curious if you have just a couple quick thoughts on what we might see in the future here in the district with climate change and how it might affect how we do our projects and what that might look like. I don't know what to think altogether.
Well, and it is, even this year is an interesting year, right? We're in a drought right now, and I unfortunately think this isn't going to be an uncommon year that we see. I'm hoping it is, but the reality is with climate change that we may see more years like this where there just really is a low snowpack, which means drier stream systems, and it may mean for our mitigation sites a little bit lack of water for whether it's for the wetlands that we're trying to create or the riparian habitat that we're trying to create. So does that mean that we are doing more different techniques to still get that habitat, doing deeper rooted plantings to get to the groundwater wherever it is, or shrinking kind of that buffer that we're trying to create or that corridor itself, again, to access the water that we know is going to be there. But I think it's still important to create the habitat because of, again, all the functions that we've talked about before. But thinking out of the box on how do we make it successful in the conditions that we have.
Yeah. I'm concerned not just about any kind of wet or mesic riparian habitat, but lately we've at the district, and I think the industry in general has been really trying to take on the idea of vegetation as infrastructure, and so we try to do like vegetated soil lifts, or it's buried soil riprap with maybe some wetland sod over it. But we're really relying on a lot of the root systems to help anchor our bank stabilization and that kind of thing, trying to get away from hardened solutions where we can. But I'm a little concerned if we start having droughts that we're not going to be getting that robust vegetation that we're so used to. To your point earlier, you mentioned how much water comes into our system after development, both from runoff and from irrigation long return flows and from sewage treatment plants that put the water back, the treated water, of course, back in the creek. Yeah. We have a lot of water in our system that frankly shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And as things dry out, it's going to go away. So I'm a little concerned about how we're going to deal with that. But I guess you'll figure that out. I'll be gone.
And I'm still hopeful that, again, we can find the techniques that are needed to create that habitat.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think so.
It is interesting to see the different conditions, because before it definitely has been like, well, let's water for at least a year or, sometimes even longer, depending on the system. And that might not be available anymore to do that temporary irrigation.
Yeah.
And so that's where the construction observation really comes key into making sure that happens so that our ecologists can have input into how things are being installed. And then I think it can be even more on what the district is doing that we mentioned, those vegetation establishment plans and vegetation management plans. I mean, I think the reality is that, that we've seen over the 20 years is you can't always just walk away and a site be successful. That there is that long-term need to see how the site is progressing. And if the willows are overgrown, how can we rein them back in and get them to the level that we need? Or, if this species is looking like it's struggling, what other species can we put in to still provide that component that we were aiming for?
Yeah, that's good. So we're just about to wrap up here, and I want to ask you one last question, and it's more of kind of that call to action that we'd want to see. From your perspective, and imagine you're talking to our audience right now, and the audience is made up of engineers, the multidisciplinary people that we've alluded to. What is your hope for how they can help contribute to what we've been talking about? What are some things that they can bring to the table, perhaps in the future, that might be helpful to us as team members who are looking to create a good project? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it would be, again, what we've talked about in that collaborative approach and bringing everybody to the table at the very beginning. And I've seen some projects do this and then some projects not, but I think it is really helpful at the very beginning to both discuss individually of what is your purpose for this project. What is the ultimate goal that you see for the project? And then what is, as a team, what is the ultimate objective and goal for the project? So that we can all understand where each other are coming from, and then how our voices then can play into the design and the overall success of the project. So I think that's really helpful. And again, just being always willing to listen to your colleagues and your teammates on the project and what thoughts they have on making it a success. So what about you, Mary? What do you want to see?
I would say the same thing, Monika. I really like the fact that we kind of brought it. These projects are really less about what we're putting in the ground and more about the people that are making it happen. And I think if we can just always recognize that it always comes back to the people. It's the people on the teams that are undertaking the work. It's the people who are regulating the work. It's the people that live in the communities. So I think, the more we can just kind of stay aware of that and collaborate together, I think we'll end up with some pretty good stuff in the future. So
I'm hopeful. And it's always a whirlwind on regulations. You never know where they're going to take us.
No, you never know. It's given me 30 years of job security because they always change.
They always change. And for the most part, like we said, they have changed for the better for projects to evolve and get better over time.
Agreed.
And hopefully we can continue that without causing a headache for all of our teaming partners.
Yes. Hopefully the permitting isn't like the worst part of the project always. But well, Monika, I want to really thank you for being here today and
thank you
chatting
for
with
having
me, going down memory lane.
It's always fun to chat with you.
Yes, and we can go on forever, but we're going to cut it off for now, and we're going to thank everybody for taking the time to listen, and hopefully folks got a little bit out of our conversation today. I know I did. So thanks.
Thank you.